Hey, everybody, welcome back to the channel that takes you deep inside the San Francisco 49ers. I'm your host, Jack Hammer, and we have a special guest. It's been a while since I've had somebody join me on the show. Everybody, I think, knows Vish, right? Vish Kumaran. He has his own channel. How you doing, Vish?
I'm good, Jack. How are you?
I'm good. Hey, I'm excited to get a chance to talk with you. I've watched you do YouTube for a long time, tried to get you on my channel and talk. One of the things I always liked about you is that you're very level-headed. Like, you see things from a million different directions. And that's how football is to me. There's not just a straight line. And that's one of the things that I really like about the way that you break down the game. So I wanted to bring you on. I wanted to get your thoughts on Trey Lance. I wanted to get your thoughts on Brock Purdy, Nick Bosa, and whatever else, wherever else this conversation goes. And, I should have asked you how long you had before we started, but
I have time. We can go for about an hour 30, depending on your time. That's very kind of you, by the way. And I wanted to add something I've always admired about you, and you and I have corresponded about doing a show together on multiple occasions. It just never came to be because I don't know why, but we finally are doing it together. But something I genuinely really enjoy about you and your coverage is the fact that you always tell it how you think it is. And I think that you can't say that about everybody that does Niners coverage. You don't get bothered by what other people tell you. You don't get bothered by how much criticism you get for what you say. You stand by what you believe. And that's why it's awesome to talk to you about this, because I know that everything you say is truly authentic, and it allows us to have a really good conversation. In fact, we're 15 minutes late, and usually I'm very late to shows, but we are 15 minutes late because you and I just had 15 minutes that we were just riffing back and forth and having really good conversation. So I can't wait to do this.
yeah. So let's just get into it. Let's do with the Trey Lance. We were talking a lot about Lance. Lance, it didn't work out in San Francisco, and there's just been all kinds of, just reasons as why people are bringing it up. In your estimation, where did things go wrong for Trey Lance with the 49ers? Where did this thing all hit the wrong track?
I think a lot of people point to the finger injury, but for me, this all went wrong before they drafted him. I don't know if you remember, you and I were both actually on Grant shows. I think I was the Monday show, you were the Thursday or Wednesday show at the time, and we would do the different shows on the quarterbacks in 2021. And I was not pro drafting Trey Lance, not because I disliked Trey Lance, the player, just because I thought the timelines would be conflicting. And I think what ultimately came to be for the 49ers is that there was never a proper way that they could integrate the quarterback that they wanted to develop and put their franchise behind, given the investment they made in him, and allow their team to then have to suffer because of it. It felt like ever since they drafted him, they were always at these inflection decision points where they had to decide between competing today or allowing their quarterback time to develop. And you can't blame them for deciding to compete today when you look at their roster and the opportunity they had. They were back-to-back NFC Championship game participants. They were very close to winning the Super Bowl. And so I think that for me, ultimately, everything with the Trey Lance trade and all of that went wrong when they traded up a month before the draft without knowing who they were going to take, came to this process where they decided on Trey Lance. We're so sure about Trey Lance that the day before the draft, they called about Aaron Rodgers. All of that, I think that was where the bad process existed. I think they wanted a quarterback. They weren't sure who they wanted, and they landed at Trey Lance. And I think that ultimately created an uneasy situation always to integrate him.
Yeah, and see, for me, I've said in recent days that I do think it's the injuries more than anything, because then the reason just is because it ruined so much for him, right? So the finger injury, it wasn't just the finger injury, it's the finger injury which kind of starts it, but then it's the knee injury against Arizona, and I think everybody's kind of focused on that finger. I think the finger started it, and I think part of the reason, like for myself, why I've talked about the finger so much is, and I should have caught onto this, and I kind of did back at the beginning of the years. The finger was there, and then the finger was gone last year. Like, we didn't talk about the finger at all last year. Mm-hmm. And then all of a sudden during the off season, like that first day of OTAs, it came up again. Like out of the blue, somebody brought up his finger injury. And it was the weirdest thing, because it wasn't something that anybody in the organization talked about in 2022. Trey himself,
I think he brought it up himself, right? He said, "Oh, I had to recover through that," because somebody might have asked him a question, "Are you going to change your throwing mechanics?"
Yeah, somebody had mentioned something to him. Somebody brought up the finger piece, but I remember like in 2022, he was saying that it was all good to go. And, so it's all it was just kind of a weird that it was all of a sudden a talking point again. But I think it's the finger and then it's the knee against Arizona because
the MCL strain.
Yeah, because if you remember, Kyle Shanahan said around that time that
they were going to start him against Indianapolis.
Yeah, that they wanted to keep rolling with him because they kept trying. And Shanahan said this in the Albert Burr article, right? And you read it because you said it was a really good article. And he talked about it. Like they kept trying to give him chances. Even in 2021, when they had Garoppolo, they kept trying to find ways to get him in. Like I've heard that the players pushed back on the 2-quarterback system, which that makes sense to me. I wouldn't want to do that if I was a player. It's just hard.
Especially the way they did it week 1, by the way, Jack. If you don't mind me interrupting, sorry about that. I do think that it wasn't just the quarterback system, but I think it was an ugly ego look when they have him go all the way down the field and they let him throw the 5-yard easy touchdown on the return route. That was like, hey, let me show off my draft pick and make his stats look good, right? And I think that specifically, rather than integrating the second quarterback, is what upset people because he got the highlight touchdown and the quarterback that took him down the field was Garoppolo.
Yeah, that's right. And it's funny because as you say that, I get flashbacks as you weren't around. I'm old enough to remember when they did that to Joe Montana. And if you watch the Joe Montana documentary, Randy Cross talks about that, how they're in a game in New Orleans, the beginning of the season, Montana leads them all the way down, and then Joe leaves and they prod out Steve Young, right? And so it's like Kyle Shanahan didn't learn from history, right? Like you've got to pick a guy. And that's when like in 88, when the Niners won the Super Bowl that year, if you look at it, like their season was on the brink. And part of the reason it was on the brink is because Walsh couldn't pick a guy. And it wasn't till, was it the guy that was the coach for the Packers, Mike Holmgren? Mike Holmgren said to him, you got to pick somebody here, man. And Walsh got all pissed off and left the room. And he came back and said, we're going with Montana. And from there on, they took off, right?
Didn't it feel like the Niners kind of had a similar situation in 21? Like at that 3-5 inflection point moment, it felt like that was when Shanahan was like, all right, we're riding it out with Jimmy. And it felt like that was a turning point for the team.
Yeah, because you kept having this back and forth. It was just like this oscillating thing all the time. And it didn't even seem like Kyle was all the way bought in. Like, they're against Green Bay in the red zone and he throws them out there for one play, that kind of stuff.
4th and goal from the 2, right?
Right, for the touchdown. Like it just kind of continued to happen. And so it was like almost at that point where it's like their season's on the brink and they just went ahead and they started winning games. And once you start winning games, you don't have a choice anyway. And I think that showed later on in the year when even though they had to go with Lance and he played okay against Houston, that they went right back to Jimmy. And then when Jimmy was hurt in the playoffs and couldn't even throw, they kept throwing him out there.
Right.
So yeah, I do. I think that I understand what you're saying on the process, and I do think the process was odd, and the whole thing with Lance was just. I think Lance is a better player today than he was when he got here, and anyway, that's just my whole thing on it. I want to get your feel on, and that's good.
I will say this too, Jack. Excuse me, I almost called you Rob because I was on with him earlier today. I've been doing this. I almost called Larry somebody, or I almost called Ryan Hensley Larry. Funnily enough, okay. But the one thing about the finger injury I say is that I feel like they've put all the blame on the finger injury, like his issues throwing stem from the finger injury. But I remember every former quarterback and quarterback coach saying that there were mechanical issues with him before the draft, like in terms of where his arm slot was dipping, how far the ball dipped below his waist and all of that. And if you look at the way he throws the ball now, it's way tighter. It's way more concise. It's way different from even when he threw the ball pre-finger injury before the draft, when he also had trouble controlling the ball. Now, he did spin it better, but he did have issues controlling the ball then too. So I feel like they're using this finger injury to say, hey, this is why he didn't make the strides throwing the football he did. But I felt like 50% of his issues with the 49ers were throwing it. The other 50% was deciding to throw it, which was always a little bit slow and a little bit late too.
Yeah, and I think there was a lot of it had to do with throwing it late. But it was it was good to see him in this camp. Like that's one of the reasons why when they decided to go with Sam Darnold, I was vocal against it because I felt like Trey Lance had the best camp that we've ever seen of him. He put in the work, everything that he did. You could tell he was better. I felt like he performed better than Darnold on a regular basis in camp. Even the preseason games, I felt like especially the last one, I thought he was really good in the last one, the one against the Broncos.
Denver.
I thought he was really good. You know, in the Raider game, struggled, got better, all that kind of stuff. We didn't see enough of Darnold really in that one to compare him. I don't know. I just felt like he just did a really good job. So much better this year.
I think ultimately, Jack, what it came down to is to build the best quarterback room around Brock Purdy. Once he came back healthy, Lance had to be way better than Darnold for him to be the correct backup for Purdy. And that's what it was always. He had his work cut out for him once Purdy came back. When they were vying for the backup job, he had his work cut out for him because those 55 games were always going to work in Darnold's favor, however crappy you think they were.
Yeah, and that's the only thing that makes sense, right? Is he had to be way better. It's kind of like it's almost like in 2021 when he was competing with Garoppolo, he needed to be way better than Jimmy to get the starting gig,
right?
Because in some ways he needed to prove to everybody on the team as well that he was better, not just Shanahan but everybody else. And it was kind of like that this time. That's the only thing that makes sense to me. I mentioned that on the channel a while back. People got upset with me about it a couple of days ago. But
by the way, It's a great point because if we're speaking of opportunity, they also gave him that opportunity in 2021. If you remember the joint practices against the Chargers, they split the reps for the first time, and they said before the Chargers preseason game that it would be Jimmy, Trey, and then back to Jimmy. And then they put Jimmy in, put Trey in. Trey struggled with the ones, and then they kept him with the two. And I remember Chris Sims came on PFT Live the next day, and he said, as Shanahan's best friend, he said that he thought that was Shanahan giving him a chance to earn the job in front of the team, and he fell on his face. That's what Chris Sims said. But yeah, pretty much.
I agree. I would agree with Chris Sims on that. I think that was, there's been so many people that have pushed back on me saying that there wasn't a competition. There was absolutely a competition, and that's the proof that there was a competition because they were in that second preseason game. They just got done with the joint practices. And the fact that they were splitting reps with the ones, and you're right, it was supposed to go back and forth, but Garoppolo, if you remember, had that super long drive, so I think that's why he didn't come back on the field.
Was it a super long drive? I thought they had the long drive, then it was 3rd and 14, and he threw a pick that went off Brandon Ayuk's hands.
Well, however it ended, but it was the first drive.
Oh, the drive was long though up till then. You might be right about that. I don't remember the plays there.
It was just a really long drive, and I don't even think that Lance, when he got into the game for the first time, it was even the same quarter. I think it was actually the second quarter by the time he got in. I don't remember completely, but I just remember the Garoppolo drive was a really long, time-consuming, short.
Yeah, perhaps you might be right on that.
So anyway, and then. We got a couple of super chats. We'll get to those in a second. So, Jeremy, I got you. Don't worry. The other thing I want to ask, now he's gone. Now he's in Dallas. So I wanted to get your thought on this because I keep hearing that he's in a better place now, that he's fortunate to land in Dallas. Dallas is going to do a better job of developing him, all these types of things. And I wanted to get your thoughts on that whole talking point that's out there.
Yeah, so I think in some ways Dallas might be better for him. One, I think he needed the change of scenery. I said after the first preseason game, I'm not sure if you heard, but I said they should trade him because I felt like, hey, this isn't working for either party. This just doesn't make sense at this point. Purdy's back. They should trade him. And getting a 4th round pick is not something I expected. It's better value than what I expected. So like from that standpoint, I agree with both of those things, given all the circumstances that happen. I think Dallas might be better for him because he's near Jeff Christensen. They work out in Dallas. He's clearly made strides with how he's throwing the football over the course of the offseason with him, and perhaps now he can get more work in. I think Dak's the right quarterback to be in front of him because I think Dak in a lot of ways is very similar to him. That was my comparison for him when he came out. Personality-wise, demeanor-wise, Dak also went through this very similar ankle injury as well and had to make the recovery and did all of that. So I think from that standpoint, it's the right thing. But I don't know that it's given him anything than a team that had very little financial wiggle room to make a room at quarterback has now taken a chance on basically what was a failed prospect for the 49ers. Besides that, I think he is the 3rd quarterback there for now. Cooper Rush and Dak are definitely ahead of him. And then we'll see what happens because then he has really 1 year left on his contract. And that 1 year will basically dictate where he's at. So this season for him, I think it's a little bit easier because his job isn't going to be about performing on the field. It's about performing in meeting rooms, performing in the practice field, proving to Dallas that he's worth an investment long term in terms of developing. But then next offseason, that's where he's going to have to do it on the field. Because as much as I think the change of scenery is a positive for him, Dallas isn't contractually obligated beyond next year to keep him or develop him or do anything. So there will have to be a level of performance as either where he needs to prove he's either Dallas's backup or Dallas's starter, at least in the short term in 2024.
Yeah, I think it's a good spot for him from the standpoints that you're talking about. The opportunity is there. The opportunity to maybe take over after 2024, I think, is there. Who knows what's going to happen with Dak Prescott, because he's kind of like the 49ers quarterbacks, right? And that he's been injured a lot, right? So, maybe there's going to be an opportunity for him to, if he can get past Cooper Rush, to get onto the field.
Mm-hmm.
I think for me, the bigger thing is all we've heard for the last 2 years is that Lance needs to play. Lance needs to play. Now he's going to Dallas, and he's in the same spot that he was going to be in San Francisco in terms of playing. And so in terms of developing as a quarterback, if it was going to take playing to develop, I don't know how Dallas is the right spot. I think that's more where I'm coming from on it.
I agree with that. That's a good point. I do think offensively, if McCarthy goes back to who he was in Green Bay, I think it'll just suit Lance a little more spread out, a little more defined pre-snap. Now the concepts are pretty standard, right? They like running like slant flat, stuff like that, but it also allows the quarterback to freelance a little bit more. I do think when you put the quarterback in what the Niners do, sure, you help them run the football when you get all condensed like the Niners do. But I think when you're condensed, it creates a muddier pre-snap picture for the quarterback, right? Because sometimes based on leverage or splits, you can't always know whether with man zone indicators. Perhaps motion definitely helps that and all of that. But I think for Lance specifically, I do think not being condensed, being a little bit more spread out, putting him, I think he is more suited under center than shotgun too, by the way, while we're on that topic. So I don't know how that'll fit, but I do think that Dallas's offense might be a better fit for him from that standpoint, especially because there is a timing, obviously, to every West Coast-based offense, but the Niners offense specifically, everything is about timing and rhythm with the quarterback, right? Like you've seen them. How much do they rep working the quarterback's feet in progressions? I'm sure that's all they do with the quarterbacks in practice, making sure that their feet are completely tied to the drop, to getting on first hitch, you throw to 1, on the second hitch, you throw to 2, and you're always getting your body in the right position and all of that. Mm-hmm. And so I think that there were fundamental and technical things that it was always going to be hard to get Lance up to speed in an offseason with for this offense. And I think there's a little more leeway in Dallas's offense there for him too. But I also don't know what McCarthy is going to run, right? Like they were running Kellen Moore's offense, really.
Sure. Yeah. And plus too, like you said, if he's the 3 this year and there's no pressure on him, it's just about learning the system. And then you go out there and you compete in 2024, could help him out as well. So there's a lot of things. I'm wishing for the best for him. He, like I was saying, like I really liked the way that he took it upon himself to come in, and I felt like he really improved himself in this last offseason and came in.
100%.
Was a different player. Like last year in training camp, and he couldn't even throw the out. He'd throw an out, and you didn't know where the ball was going. Mm-hmm. And this year, he was just on the money repeatedly with it and stuff. And he was just a different player. I'm glad that
I liked his confidence too, Jack. I don't know. A lot of people say his confidence goes up and down. I always felt like his confidence was a little low. And I thought he shook off throughout the preseason. Like he throws the near pick versus the Raiders, right? He throws it straight to the linebacker, doesn't see him. Bad throw. Next throw, he comes back and rips the dagger route on a wide in from tight bunch. Really, really nice throw. He throws the interception in the screen against Denver. It feels like, okay, it's all going wrong. This is a disaster for Trey Lance. And he comes back and has the quarter of his preseason life. So there is something about him there that you can't just say he's all done, right? Because he seems to be still fighting. He seems to be still alive, and he made some real strides this offseason. But he's in Dallas now.
That's exactly what I was saying, right? Was that because when I do like my film breakdowns, I've always done it this way. It's like, well, shit, when Jimmy Garoppolo, he misses a wide open Kyle Juszczyk down the sideline. Okay, well, how does he bounce back from that? And so it's always kind of been the same thing with Lance. And there was a couple, like you said, where it was bad plays, but he bounced back and he'd make plays right after. So there's a lot of things to like about it. He's in Dallas, like you said. Everybody wants us to stop talking about Trey, but I want to get a chance to hear your thoughts on it. And it's good. I'm looking forward to see what he can do. I hope that it doesn't end up being a Charles Haley situation in 2024, 2025, where all of a sudden he's blossoming and now the 49ers are fighting with him to get to the Super Bowl every year. That'd be awful.
Yeah, it would be awful. I'm like unbothered at this point because that would just be like cruel. Like it's already the worst trade ever. Now it's the worst trade ever times 2 because you traded up for him. He was nothing for you. And then you didn't wait long enough because he became something that's like the worst dream ever. That's like, wake up. Like,
yeah, no, and it is. That's exactly right. Real quick, let's get to a couple super chats. Jeremy hit us up. He says, thanks very much. He says, so I visited Italy for my birthday the last 11 days, went to an AC Milan soccer game and witnessed what true supporters are. Fans that are truly diehard. They chanted and screamed their lungs out for the full game. I don't know about you, Vish. I had a chance to go over to Barcelona back in 2019, and it was when Barcelona was still good, and they're playing in the championship against Liverpool. I think they were in the semifinal round against Liverpool. And that town, they were playing in Barcelona while we were there that one night. And that place was the entire town was electric. We ended up in a restaurant to watch the game, but you could walk down Las Ramblas, which is like the main tour street in Barcelona. And you could have shot a cannon down the street and not hit anything because there was nobody out there. Everybody was inside watching this soccer game.
That's awesome.
Soccer fans are definitely a different breed. I totally know what you're saying here, Jeremy, because we think of the 49er faithful, but they're nothing like AC Milan or FC Barcelona or any of these.
Yeah. Oh yeah. 100%.
And then he also says, that being said, what's up with all this Lance drama when he never won for us? Jimmy won and received slander. We literally won and these folks were unhappy. Help me understand, Jack. What up, Vish? Jeremy was always a big supporter of Jimmy Garoppolo. He always wondered why he got hate. And I was always one of the guys that kind of agreed with him.
I will say I was probably too critical of Jimmy. I think when you get into the details of Jimmy, the quarterback, you sometimes lose sight of Jimmy's temperament and his personality dealing with things and how well he truly dealt with things. And so for sure, I wouldn't walk back any of my criticisms of Jimmy because I think they were all football related, but I definitely wish I gave more credit to how well he handled himself through some pretty difficult situations here that I don't know that every quarterback could have handled themselves the way he did.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to seeing how he does in Vegas. I think he has a really good chance there. They have really good playmakers around him.
Especially if they get Jacobs back too.
Yeah, well, and they did, because they signed him, right? So if everything works out here, I think he has a good chance to do really well offensively. If their defense can come around, that's the other piece. So we'll see. And then there's this kind of moving off of Trey Lance, and this is the perfect one. Courtney says, so Brock Purdy had arm fatigue. Did I read that correctly? So what Courtney's getting at is Brock Purdy today at practice, there were reports that he wasn't going through, that it seemed like he was taking more plays off, those types of things. I wasn't in Santa Clara today, so I can't speak to exactly what it looked like. But what I will say is I wrote about this back on, I believe it was the 8th of August, was that I noticed at that point that he was not making all of the throws during the period where they were working with the receivers. He would do most of the work, but he wasn't when it was his rotation, he'd throw a couple and then he'd let the other 3 quarterbacks take it. The other thing that's always been happening is, there's the one drill where they go, across the field and they're take a few steps. The coach slaps his hand, he throws the ball, that kind of thing. There's been for a while where they do that and he'll work one way, but then the other way, he doesn't throw the ball. He just acts like he's throwing it. So from what I read, the people that were there were told by PR that it's just part of his pitch count. And I think that's kind of where we are. I don't think he has arm fatigue. I don't think it's anything that's even different than what he was doing in the past. I think it's just a continuation of kind of where he's been already.
All right. That's good to know.
So wanted to get that out. And then, we were talking about this before the show, and when it comes to Brock Purdy, it's been some really interesting takes on both sides of the coin with this guy, right? He's been almost as divisive in some ways as Trey Lance, because he doesn't have the arm strength. He's not big enough. He's not going to get bigger and stronger and faster. And he is who he is and all those kind of things. Vish, who to you is Brock Purdy?
I think he's a nice quarterback. I don't know why we have to be so conclusive when we talk about him. He's also played 8 games. He played those 8 games at a very high level. He naturally makes plays. He's a very good playmaker. He's accurate. He's a good athlete. He processes information well. I think that there were some mistakes, sure, from a rookie standpoint, where he missed definitely some throws and available plays, and he definitely could have managed the pocket better. But overall, I mean, he's an ascending player. I don't know why people are so conclusive on him. People are either so sure that he's bad and he's a limited quarterback, or that he's excellent and he's better than Mahomes. And I just look at him. I think he had 8 very, very good games. And I think he has a nice skill set at quarterback within this offense. And I'm excited to see what he does this year. I don't know that it's a lot deeper than that. And I don't know that his flaws are a lot deeper than, hey, he's a young quarterback and he missed some stuff. And he's a young quarterback and sometimes he didn't manage the pocket so well. And he's a young quarterback and sometimes he got lucky on some plays. And he also naturally has a playmaker instinct that I'm not sure is given enough credit to. I talk about this a lot, Jack. I feel like quarterbacks are often kind of tiered into their archetype. So like if you get a quarterback that's big and fast, we automatically say that that quarterback is good off schedule. But to me, off schedule is something when I look at a quarterback that's created as an instinct. I think that is an ability. Like I think people naturally can either make plays instinctually off schedule or they can. I think Joe Burrow to Justin Herbert is always my favorite example I like to use for this, because Justin Herbert conventionally has the off-schedule skill set when you look at his arm, the way he's able to move, the way he's able to move his body when he runs and all of that. But Joe Burrow has that natural ability to escape the pocket, make somebody miss, move his body a little bit, be an athlete and make a guy miss and make a throw. And that's where I think Purdy specifically, while missing the size and speed that usually comes with that, he does have a natural playmaker instinct that's pretty creative and fun to watch.
Yeah, I think so. And real quick, Jeremy, with the super chat, wanted to shout you out. He says, Vish, with that college education, you handled that well, bro. Good seeing you on. Jack, much love, Niner Gang. Jeremy, you're always a good one, man. You're on here. You already gave me $25 today. That's awesome. But, more importantly, you're a good dude. I always like you being in the chat. And I'll say this, I agree with a lot of what you said on him. Like I'm one of those guys who I kind of compared his numbers to Patrick Mahomes. Now, I don't think he's Patrick Mahomes. I'm not that crazy yet, but I think he was undersold by a lot of people, because I feel like if you just take his numbers and you take his film, this is a guy who performed at a really high level right off the bat. From the game against Miami on, I remember I was in the press box at Levi Stadium when he came on the field, and I remember
first play 0 blitz.
When he came on, everybody's like, oh shit, right? And all of a sudden they just go right down the field, and you're like, oh, that's pretty good. And then the throw coming back the other way when he throws that ball to George Kittle, the throw over the middle. I mean, that's just like, it's like, ooh, that's different. And then you go to the game the next. It's just everything he did was just like, whoa.
I remember exactly that, because for me, I actually thought it was better early on. I think the discipline he played with early on was a little bit lost once he started feeling himself and feeling how many plays he could make off schedule. He started freelancing maybe more than he should. And he's talked about this being a focus for him growing. But I remember the first play, I think his first play is literally a 0 blitz, and he goes hot, right? Like on top of the ball to Kittle, right in front of his face. And that's where he takes a hit too. And I remember watching that, and I was like, whoa, okay, this is not your average 7th round quarterback, because you wouldn't expect him to be so quick at finding his hot on a 0 blitz and standing right down the barrel and throwing it. And that's where I was like, okay, there's something here. Yeah.
Yeah. And it's funny because I remember Purdy was a name that everybody was talking about at one point as being a guy that was going to go early in the draft. I think this was like in
3 years ago.
Yeah, but yeah, and then what happened was, and he's talked about it. The team there were some things around him, and he started feeling like he had to make more plays, and then that's when you started to see some of those weird stuff on film that everybody kind of started pointing out. And you look at it, and for me, I think the biggest thing is you just watch him play. Like you watch him play on Saturday night or Friday night against the Chargers, and it's just everything is just so quick. I think that's the thing is it's to the right, it's not there, to the middle, ball's out, move on to the next play. Everything that he does has that rhythm and a timing to it, and I think that's the thing more than anything else that makes him stand out to me.
Yeah, he plays the position very, very naturally and very efficiently. And it's like cool to see. And I wouldn't say like that everybody in the league plays it like very, very naturally. Like there are some guys even at the top of the league that play the position very, very deliberately and mechanically, right? Like Daniel Jones is a guy that I would put somewhere in the top 15 quarterbacks. He plays a very, very mechanical and deliberate style of let me go to 1 to 2 style of quarterback, right? Versus you watch somebody like Lamar, even when he plays in the pass game, it's so instinctive on how he feels space, how he moves within the pocket. And like Brock Purdy plays the position very, very instinctively. And I think that's what you're talking about when you're talking about the speed in which he plays at. It's because he's not reacting. He's instinctively moving, or he is instinctively reacting, but there isn't that split second where he reacts. It's a reaction as he's moving. And I think that's what the Niners are really, really enamored with, and hopefully it pays out.
And I think it's the quickness also is his ability to move around. Like he doesn't have the top end speed that a guy like Trey Lance had, right? Trey's once you get him rolling, he's fast, but I think he's quicker in that short burst area. We've talked about it ad nauseum this offseason about how, the 1-5-5 split, how it's the same.
I think he also knows where he's going. Like, I think with Trey Lance, a lot of the slowness is because it's always when he's moving, like, should I run? Should I throw? Where should I move? You can feel the deliberateness in his process. And that's where he's really young and inexperienced, and he's still going through the learning process of becoming instinctual in that. And with Purdy, it's like, I'm out of there. I'm going. I know where I'm. Even Darnold, right? Darnold has maybe a little less indecision than Lance, for example, but you can feel an indecision with Darnold in every way he plays. And with Purdy, I would say, if you want to say the number one thing, and this is actually a new point that you brought me to, if I want to say the number one thing in his game that I can understand what the Niners like for, everything he does, he has a conviction to doing it. He's confident, and he just does it. And it's like he doesn't care. He just lets it go, and that's what they like, right? Shanahan always talks about letting it rip.
Yeah, he does. And I think it's interesting because we were talking about this before the show. And I think this is one of the biggest things that stand out to me is the way that he just carries himself. Like we're talking about this before the show about all the quarterbacks and, how you can sometimes you can just tell if there's a guy that's the guy. And with Jimmy Garoppolo in 2021, that was my first season covering the team. So that was my first introduction to it. But when he came up to talk, there was just a different, you always hear him say, "Oh, he just got it." Well, that was kind of it. He just had it when he came to talk. It was natural to him. It didn't feel like it was forced. And yeah, he'd kind of just give you the same, whatever answers, that kind of thing. But it was just, there was a rhythm to it. And you get a lot of that with Brock Purdy. He is like, somebody mentioned it on Twitter the other day, like listening to him talk, like how good he is at the podium. And I responded back to him, it's because he sounds like a franchise quarterback.
That was me.
Was it you?
Yeah.
Okay.
It was us.
Yeah. The way that he handles himself, and it's just like, even at practice, is like, he's there to work, and he's not like a rah guy, but he's excited at the same time and all, you know what I mean? And I really like, for me, I like that personality. And I think Kyle Shanahan likes that personality because Kyle Shanahan's kind of a little bit of a red ass too, right? And that's kind of what you get from Brock Purdy in a lot of ways.
Yeah, I 100% agree. And I think what you described him at the podium, it was an awkward situation for him too, right? He's the new franchise quarterback, and he didn't have anything to do with what turned out to be a big mistake for the 49ers, which was the entire Trey Lance trader situation. I don't think Trey Lance by any means is a mistake, but for the 49ers, this was a mistake. We'll find out if Trey Lance is actually a bust. if he gets to play or if he doesn't, but hopefully he does for us to actually find that out. He, I thought, handled the questions he got about it better than they did. Like, I thought the way he answered it, how honest he was, how empathetic he was, you could feel emotionally his emotions, but he was also very professional in how he answered it. He didn't share too much information. He didn't put anyone down. I mean, he got asked the same kind of bullshit question he could have been condescending to the way Shanahan was at the end of his presser, right? Like, what the hell kind of a question is, do you feel guilty that you're on in his spot and he's somewhere else? And instead, he was very, very empathetic to Trey Lance in how he answered that question. And that's not something that I think you find in people instinctually there, because naturally people get defensive in a moment like that. Like, hey, are you saying that I didn't earn this? Like, I should feel guilty? Like, do you know what I've done to be here? And instead, he went immediately to, I'm happy for what Trey Lance is and where he is. And so that's where I got to give him a lot of credit, because I think the way he handled himself and the way he handles himself, even with all the questions about his arm jack, like, when are you coming back? All of this. And he was not fazed by it. It didn't bother him. But he was also never going to say anything but, I'm taking this one day at a time. His mindset and mentality is definitely something you can admire. And I think that's really when it comes down to it, to me, like, Jack, he is below average in a lot of areas physically. That's just the God's honest truth. Now, his arm used to not be NFL caliber in Iowa State. Like, when they say he put MPH on it, you can see that his arm strength is different in the NFL than it was in Iowa State, but he's still below average in a lot of areas. But they're betting this much on him, and to me, the bet is intangible, because there's no way you can look at his tangibles, even though they're all requisite to be an NFL starter, and feel like, yeah, I want to bet on that guy. There has to be something more to him, just because he is not physically the most impressive guy.
Yeah, no, he's not. And I think like his answer though also is it speaks to something else, in that on social media and 49ers Twitter, there's been this raging battle around Trey Lance since 2021. And there was people after the trade who told me, well, it's good that they trade him because they got rid of the distraction with Lance, right? And I don't think that distraction ever hit the locker room. I think it was a distraction outside of the locker room. It was a distraction on YouTube and Twitter and those kind of things. But the team itself, I could be wrong, but I don't think it was ever as much of a distraction there.
Pause. Because I think it would have been a distraction if they weren't winning. Richard Sherman and Pete Carroll did a really nice podcast on this when they talked about all the shit the Seattle team was going through. And they were like, if we weren't winning, like, all of this shit would have come out and been the reasons why we didn't win. But because we were winning, everybody would just, like, I mean, dude, Golden Tate and Percy Harvin got in a fist fight the week before the Super Bowl where they were literally, like, going at it. And now it's like one of those funny untold stories. But if they got blown out 43-8 the other way in that game, we would point to that as the reason why they didn't win the Super Bowl. So I think in the Niners case, a lot of it is that the distractions didn't affect the result of what was going on the football field. But the moment they start losing, I feel like we're going to look at those things and be like, people are going to be like, yeah, that's why. This is why. This trade up, the way they handle this. Like, these things will start to rear their ugly head the moment winning isn't being the ultimate deodorant to all of this.
That's a really good point, because that is, they're winning all the time. So when you're winning, like you said, winning's the ultimate deodorant. Like, even the 94 team, right? Jerry Rice hated Deion Sanders, and there was no bones about it that he didn't, like, and Deion's still out there partying in Miami, and they won the game. So it wasn't a big deal. But if that could have blown up in their face, and in a million different ways, and it never did. It's funny how, like, so many of these things, like, I gotta say, like, the Shanahan era in San Francisco, to me right now, is the most similar to what I grew up watching, because I grew up watching Joe Montana, right? And I grew up with the Bill Walsh, and he's not Bill Walsh because he's lost in the Super Bowl, right? But other than the Super Bowl loss, like, there's a lot of things that are very similar about, like, this is I think the best for a prolonged period of time we've seen them. And I think the future is still out there. So I just see a lot of similarities, and there's, like, a lot of things that go back to that time. It's really interesting for an old fart like this.
Right. I mean, as much as we nitpick, right, from an organizational standpoint, structure, offense, defense, working together, building a football team, philosophically being committed to a scheme offensively, committed to a scheme defensively, committed to a philosophy, all of that, like, Yeah, this is the first era that we've even seen anything like that. Even the Harbaugh era, it felt like they accumulated a lot of talent, but it didn't feel like philosophically they were committed to they were committed to football principles, but not schematic principles of we're going to be a wide zone team. We're going to get these offensive linemen, these defensive linemen, these type of running backs. Like they have a very, very nice setup where they know exactly what they're looking for. And that's where you can attribute a lot of their late round success because they find archetypes of players that they know work within their scheme, and they're very good at coaching them up.
Yeah, they're very detailed in what they're looking for. Everybody knows exactly what they're looking for. All that kind of all plays together. So it's cool in that way.
Can I ask you this, because you were alive then, and I've only read books on him. I don't think that there's a. Oh, well, I didn't mean to age you, but I don't know. Like when you read like where Bill Walsh's mind was, like relative to where football was in the 80s, it was almost like he had a time machine and he saw football even before ahead of where it is now. Like he saw it in 2025 or not 20 in 2035. Because everything he said, what he viewed position by position, what he scouted philosophically, what he believed, it's every part of the NFL is an evolution that starts from there. I mean, a lot of defenses, the evolution is from trying to stop his offense and all of that. Do you think that he was such a visionary beyond, or do you feel like, hey, that's a little bit just us remembering a guy who's not participating in anymore, and that's where the legend status comes in, and there are visionaries like him even in today's NFL?
And I think he changed the game, and I think he changed the game long before he got to San Francisco. He changed the game when he was in Cincinnati, because he basically, what he did is he said, we're going to use the pass as an extension of the run. So because at that point in time in the NFL, the pass was deep down the field to Al Davis. We're going to line up the fastest guy on the outside as we can and throw it as far as we can. And all of a sudden you had a guy who was basically throwing passes that were really nothing more than a sweep, right? And picking up big yards as a result. And the whole evolution's interesting because I think Bill Walsh, people look at him as a guy who just wanted a guy like the term that's been thrown around all offseason, a guy can dink and dunk, right? Because that's the way he uses his offense was, right? But I don't think that's the case. I think if you look back at the way that this offense was built, and the reason that it was built was because he had a quarterback in Cincinnati who could throw the ball deep. He didn't have that ability, so he had to work the shorter stuff. When he had a guy that could take it off the top off, that guy was, he did really good, but then he tore up his shoulder pretty quick. And so I think he definitely set the tone and changed the whole way the game's played. And was he a genius or anything like that? When it comes to football, he was a genius. He knew what the hell he was talking about around the football field. He had his misses and stuff and his
with
mistakes.
People too, though, right? I mean, philosophically, the way he put a team together, all of those kinds of things.
Well, yeah, and then where I see, if you want to kind of compare him to Kyle Shanahan just for a second, like. Everybody talks about how with Bill Walsh, he would get rid of you a year earlier than a year too late and that kind of stuff. And he would. And that's kind of how I see a similarity with Kyle Shanahan. Not necessarily that he's going to get rid of you that same way, but it's the honesty with which that you deal with your players. And so like with Jimmy Ward last year, where he basically told Jimmy Ward, hey, you can play nickel or you can sit on the bench. It's your choice. This is what we're doing. Like that kind of honesty, I think that part is partly why the team always plays so hard for him, because they know that he's watching and he's going to be honest, and if they don't do what they're supposed to do, he's going to write them.
And I will say this also, just for the sake of the dink and dunk conversation, I feel like that conversation sometimes is a little bit reductionist, because operating the quick game with precise timing and accuracy is a little bit more detailed and intricate than I feel like people give it credit for. Like, sure, check down, certain screens, certain manufactured throws are very easy on the quarterback, but I can show you a lot of high level 6-7 yard throws where, especially from a guy like Breeze, where you see him get 1 to 2 really fast and make a really nice move in the pocket and, make a really, really nice throw. And that's where, again, generalizing anything in the NFL is pretty frustrating, isn't it? Because it's so detailed, everything.
Yeah, and it's funny you say that because this had this happen to me yesterday. I'm doing my film breakdown, and I kept saying how easy it's just a nice, easy little throw, easy. And somebody in the comment section is like, "Dude, it's not easy. It just looks easy because he's making it look easy."
Yeah.
And I think that's part of it too, right? Is like it doesn't look hard for him, and because it doesn't look hard, it looks like it's just being given to him. And I know you can look at the things, and he's got guys running wide open and all those kind of stats. But the other part of it too is just his ability to make the game look easy. I think makes how that level at which he's playing not look as high.
That I agree with, and I think that plays into a lot of Purdy, right? Like the moxie he has, just the swagger, the belief, the way he plays. Like I think that's part of the attraction to him too, right? Like Jimmy never made it look easy with all of this. Even when Jimmy was playing excellent, he didn't make it look easy, right? Like the Kansas City game last year. How awesome was Jimmy in that game? And he also threw the world's dumbest interception in the red zone. So do we remember how awesome Jimmy was? No, we were like, yeah, Jimmy screwed it up, like ultimately. And that's where I think with Purdy, it was a little bit of, there was just a little added swagger and a confidence and a pizzazz to it that I think definitely played into our minds on it.
Yeah, he goes out there and he makes a throw. He's got a touchdown. He's pointing to his arm. He's doing
Right.
It's like
ice in his veins.
Yeah, like he's like just or like the other night he runs the touchdown in and he's pounding his chest and he's like he's like, I'm the dude, let me hear it. Like it's kind of at the same time he turns to his teammates, but this it's crazy. Shane says, hey Jack, I call it the Madden syndrome. People fall in love with physical traits, big, strong, fast. People love the combine, but playing quarterback is so much more. And I agree with that.
100%. Jack, by the way, I think you missed a couple of super chats. I don't know if you saw them.
Yeah, there's a bunch of them because we've been talking about different things, and I've missed a. Here's one.
They're all starred, by the way. If you just go to the starred comments, you can just get all of them.
Okay. Oh, see, I'm glad I did this. Real quick, Andre says, I've been waiting for a show between you two. Hope you guys can do an all 22 show during the season.
Sure.
That's going to be awesome with your football knowledge. So thank you, Andre. I appreciate it. That's really nice.
I'd do one.
Okay. And then Tech TDs and Tap says, this is a good one. Who is QB2 if Sam wants to start the 2024-2025 season? So after this season, Sam Darnold wants to go off somewhere and be a starting quarterback. What do you think?
Yeah, that's where I wish they drafted a quarterback this year because there were a bunch of them late that I thought were worth a shot. My favorite being Dorian Thompson-Robinson, who's killed it in this preseason. And I got to only mention that, Jack, because this might be his career high moment. And so I got to take the victory lap when we can. He might not do better than what he did in this preseason. So I got to take that victory lap. But I think ideally I would have liked them to have drafted a guy. But if Sam leaves and Purdy is still the guy, I think Brandon Allen is a fine number 2 quarterback. If you have a guy as your number 1 quarterback, Brandon Allen all of a sudden becomes a very viable number 2 quarterback, the way he was for Cincinnati the last 2 years. If you don't have a guy, then that's why we worry about, hey, who's the number 2?
Yeah, I think that's the biggest thing, right? Is that when you've got the dude, like the quarterback position, if you got that guy, you're set, even if there's other inconsistencies within your roster, because the quarterback can make up those things. And even if, like you said, with Brandon Allen behind Joe Burrow and all that kind of stuff, we'll see. Like I don't know. Max Duggan was a guy who I liked in the draft, and he just got cut by the Chargers. Maybe
I like Duggan too.
Maybe he's a practice squad.
I thought Duggan played pretty well too on Friday. Yeah. He ran pretty well. He was running all over the place.
That's true. He did. He has that part for him, and I liked what I saw of him at TCU, and I kind of thought he could be a guy that the Niners could take in round 6 or 7 in this draft, and they didn't do it. They went other directions. So. I mean, who knows? That's a long ways away, and people don't even want us talking about the backup quarterback now, let alone 2 years down the road. Real quick, and this one's off the quarterback because this guy's one of my favorite guys. The notorious GAV Big Gav. He's from Wales. He taught me about Wrexham. So if you ever watch Welcome to Wrexham, or if you haven't watched Welcome to Wrexham, I suggest you do it because they're a fun little soccer team out in Wales. Gav's a huge Kyle Juszczyk fan, huge Jack Little fan. As a result, he says, Vish, is Juice a casualty next year?
Absolutely.
I think so too.
I feel like that's one of the ones we all have penciled in just from a financial standpoint that this is his last year with the Niners.
Yeah.
Will it happen? I don't know. But yeah.
I kind of think that Kyle Juszczyk feels that way too.
Yeah.
just kind of listening to him talk. I think he feels like this is the last ride.
I also think he's been a very good player, but I did feel like there was some regression the last couple of years in his blocking.
Yeah, they're not giving him they got to give him the ball more. That's the other thing. I think
agree with that, right? Here's my other thing, Jack. We've talked so much about tight end too. Do you remember that period in 2020 when 12 personnel was really in because McVay started using Everett and Higbee and the two tight end setups, and the Niners didn't like using their fullback to run wide zone at the time, so they started lining up Juszczyk inline a lot more. First of all, Juszczyk blocked fine inline, and second of all, he's a better receiver than Charlie Warner, Ross Dwelly, Cam Latu, Braden Willis all combined. He's fantastic at running routes, and he catches the ball every time he gets it. I don't know why they don't just, to increase his snaps too, why not just stick him as the tight end too and have him play inline? He can do it, but yeah, I don't know. I'm not paid to make those decisions, so I don't know.
No, I'm with you too, though. I've been kind of saying that, like, they've carried four tight ends at times on this roster, and their best tight end might be the guy that's playing fullback, behind Kittle,
Right.
So yeah, I'm with that. Let him, shoot. I also, the guy back in the old days, Tom Rathman, that guy was catching a lot of balls back in the day, and we're talking about Bill Walsh and his system.
He was a physical tone setter, though. Juszczyk might be the most finesse player on the offense with the ball in his hands.
Yeah, no, he wasn't a physical. He's not definitely different in terms of like the physicality, but like the ability to get him the ball in the passing game.
Okay,
like,
fair enough.
That's kind of what I'm saying. Like they used Tom Rathman a lot in the passing game, like back in the old days.
No, right.
So anyway, so we did Gavs, Kyle Juszczyk. We got off the quarterbacks finally. I got to ask you about Nick Bosa. Where are things with Nick Bosa? The 49ers say that they budgeted for him, but the budget isn't working.
Yeah, I tweeted about it a little while ago. This is going to be historic guaranteed money that the Niners are going to give out. They've given out the maximum guaranteed money in terms of guaranteed at signing, which means when they sign the contract, what's wired into their account they've given out is about $41 million. To Deebo Samuel, I think Jimmy got 41. Trent, Javon Hargrave got 40. Nick Bosa is going to be double that because TJ Watt got $80 million guaranteed at signing, which was the highest any player has ever gotten non-quarterback. And Nick Bosa's brother got his first 3 years fully guaranteed with $78 million guaranteed at signing. I also think Nick Bosa is looking to be annually above the 30 million mark, which is only Aaron Donald right now for defensive players. I think TJ Watt's at 28 or 29. And so I think it's just a little bit bigger contract than what the Niners are used to giving, and I think that's why they're holding it until the deadline. I said the deadline was August 31st, Jack. I don't know if you heard me, but I said 31st because that's when Aaron Donald signed before 2018, and the Rams went to the Super Bowl in 2018, and Donald was, of course, the best defensive player in football, and he won Defensive Player of the Year, and he played every snap week 1 of 2018 versus the Raiders. And so I think Bosa is maybe not Donald, but in the realm of that kind of player. So he's the one of the few that can uniquely come out of that situation. But yeah, it is August 28th. I'm way more worried now.
Yeah, I think as long as they get it done by like next Sunday, I think it's okay, right? Because that gives them a whole week to get ready for the game against Pittsburgh, right? Because Sunday's a week before the first game. I mean, I would have liked to have seen it get done already and just let him get some practice in with the team. He still has time, but I think next Sunday is probably, or this Sunday coming up is really the point. Because if he's not here on Sunday, now you're talking about getting into the week before the game against Pittsburgh. And I don't think he can just show up on Wednesday and play on Sunday, even though they've talked about him as a defensive end and all that kind of stuff. I don't think that that's the case with Nick Bosa. But
I think he could do that. I just don't think you would want to create a situation where he has to do that, right? And I think if you are at that situation, you might want to sit him out for Nick Bosa's sake. Like, be like, yo, I don't want you to get in a game, do something really explosive and pull something, and now we don't have you for a longer period of time. And I guess, yeah, you make a good point there. I don't know. I'm still internalizing when I feel like is a good timeline for him to return. You know what I mean?
Sure. No, sure. And then the other thing you're talking about, like the guarantees. So maybe you can explain it to me because I think I understand like the guarantees. Is it one of those deals where I know like if they do because I don't know how TJ Watt's deal is set up. So can they do, like 40 million up front with a signing bonus, and then he's going to have another bonus that hits next year and those kind of things?
Yeah, so that's how they usually do it, right? That's how they always do it. And that's even how Trent Williams' deal is set up. Like, he signed after Ronnie Stanley and David Bakhtiari. He had a much bigger contract than the two of them, actually. And they both got $20 million guaranteed at signing. And I just wonder with Nick Bosa and a player like that, if he doesn't want to wait out those bonuses and stuff, and he wants those fully guaranteed first 3 years. And the only reason I ask that is because that's what his brother did, right? His brother got $78 million fully guaranteed at signing, and that was literally the first 3 years of his contract were guaranteed to him just then and there. Doesn't matter what happens, he's getting $78 million at least from his contract. And I wonder if Bosa is looking for that same exact thing, but with like $82 million, because Watt got 80.
Yeah, and if I was
that Jed York better get liquid if that's the case.
Yeah, and if I'm Nick Bosa and I'm in his position, I was just having this conversation with my brother like a couple of weeks ago with this whole thing. It's like, Nick Bosa doesn't need to just come in. Like he's going to wait till he gets paid what he needs to get paid. And if I'm Nick Bosa and because that's the way the 49ers always like to do it, right? Well, if something happens, you're out of luck because they can still walk even though it's. So yeah, I think it's about that fully guaranteed. Like if I go out week 3 and something happens to me, I'm still going to get that money. I'm still taken care of because I don't have to. I'm not in a position.
The Niners always do a big injury guarantee, though, right? Both Kaepernick and Garoppolo had injury guarantees, if I remember, on their contract.
Yeah, I don't remember Kaepernick. I know Garoppolo did on his. He had that injury guarantee. So I mean, but still, I think that's partly where this is all. That's got to be that's the only thing because the money that's supposed to be going to him. You know what the average is. It has to be the guaranteed money, and when that guaranteed money, how it's going to get paid out.
And I've heard people compare it to Buckner too, Jack, and I think that's a terrible comparison. I think where they got away with Buckner was that he wasn't a player picked by this regime. So even though he was viewed as the franchise player of this regime, they didn't pick him. So they were never as tied to him. Not paying Bosa, I think, could be catastrophic. Just because this is the consummate, hey, we drafted this guy, and this is the example of what we want every 49er to be. And if that guy doesn't get his money, it's like Buckner, except you actually drafted him. So people are like, whoa. Yeah.
Yeah, I think on the Buckner deal where they got lucky on Buckner is because the way they spun it was like they weren't doing Buckner because they had to bring all these other guys back. Even though when you really get down to the numbers, they could have probably made it work.
Right. They'd already made a decision, it felt like.
Still kept everybody. They did what Philadelphia is doing now. They decided to let him go to another team while they traded him, and then they're drafting his replacement. That's why when the Philly did what they were doing, I was like, let's see how this works out because this is what the Niners did, the same exact thing.
Did you watch the guy Philly drafted before the draft? I don't know how much college you watch.
No, I haven't. Looking at his numbers weren't all that great. Just looking at the stats and all that kind of stuff. And who knows?
Jack, you turn on Georgia. Even the year before, when they had Jordan Davis and Devontae Wyatt going in the first round, 88 was the best player on their D line, and Trayvon Walker went first. And then this year, Jack, we're talking. This is Quinnen Williams coming out. This is I don't know what goes on with him off the field, but on the field, this is like
a hell of a player.
This is a generational defensive tackle, which Kinlaw was really good coming out, but he wasn't Jalen Carter.
Okay. No, and we'll see how it all works out for him. I know some of the Philly guys that I follow on Twitter, some of their beat writers have talked about their defense and their interior, prior to preseason and felt like it was going to take a little bit of a step back. So it'll be interesting to kind of see how that all plays.
Oh, I agree. It'll take a step back, but I think if the off the field with him is this is like Warren Sapp falling because he failed a drug test for pot. And then, this is that talent. In my opinion, he could bust. And then everybody's going to come back to this and tell me what an idiot I am. And I'm going to have to eat it. But in my opinion, yeah.
Yeah. And Gav's asking how much it's going to cost to franchise tag him. That's not an option. I mean, they could after this year, but that's not.
I don't think that should even be in their thought process. And I don't think it will be. I feel like, Jack, I don't know how you view this. I feel like teams always put a deadline on deals on when they want it to get done. And if they really want to get the deal done, they get it done by that deadline. Like they just do whatever they can to get it done. Whatever compromises that need to be made or haven't been made, they make them. I just don't know why they don't show any urgency before the deadline. And then the second thing is, this is just like the normal course with Niners contracts. Besides the Fred Warner deal, and I suspected that it wouldn't get contentious, and that's the only one I suspected wouldn't get contentious because they had done middle linebacker highest paid deals before. They did it for Bowman and they did it for Willis. I thought they would have a nice structure that they would fall back on and how they were going to offer that deal anyway. Trent Williams got contentious. Debo got contentious. Kittle got contentious. It's only right if there is a little bit of the Dark Knight quote I shared with Rob, where it's the night gets darkest before dawn with Bosa as well. Yeah.
Yeah, and you mentioned like the whole deadline thing, and that's what John Lynch says all the time.
Sorry, yeah,
right. John Lynch says it all the time. How he says that deadlines spur action, right? And so whatever their deadline is, and I think I don't know what their deadline is necessarily.
So I was going to say Barrow shared this morning that he thought the deadline would be the cut down day, which I think is 1 p.m. Eastern or Pacific.
Tomorrow. Yeah, that's what I think. I heard that being used from that. What was happening? It was Bosa's camp was using that as trying to use that as leverage. So maybe that's for the 49ers. What they're looking at is kind of being their deadline is to have it around cut down time frame. I mean, it makes sense because that's when they're starting to build and get ready for the next game. So that makes sense in terms of we'll see. We don't know, but looking at this team going into 2023, the schedule set, the roster is almost set. Where do you think this team's going to go?
I think the season can go a variety of different ways. When you look at the team itself, when you look at the roster, I think that you would think immediately they should be one of the best teams in football. And from a talent standpoint, they still have that. But I think this team is a lot more top heavy than they've been in the past. And when I mean top heavy, I think there's a greater difference between the top of the roster and the bottom of the roster on this team. Now, I think that's because they don't have as many of those mid-level players that we used to talk about that are so good that the national media didn't know about, right? Like a Jimmy Ward was a really, really good player for a long time. Mike McGlinchey was a starting right tackle. I know he got a lot of criticism, but he was a starting right tackle. There's only like 15 of those in the NFL. Charles Omenihu was a terrific player. Samson Ebukam was a very good player. There's a few others like that, and I think they miss them. They're going to miss those guys. I don't think they have fully replaced them. And so I think that it's really a situation of they better hope that the roster of superstars they have, all of those guys stay healthy. And I think as long as those guys do, we expect the 49ers to be excellent. I don't know if this team can survive a Trent Williams, a Fred Warner, a Nick Bosa kind of injury, even a Debo Samuel, a Christian McCaffrey.
Yeah, I think with Debo, that might be a spot that they can get away with a little bit more than some of the
maybe.
Of those spots.
You're right.
I think that a guy like Clelin Ferrell, I think he's been undersold. I think he's better than what people think of him.
You think so?
I do, because I see a guy who now is he. See, here's the thing: is like I think when you look at Clelin Ferrell, I think when you look at Drake Jackson to an extent, like all these guys are kind of like Samson Ebukam type of players, where they're good players, but they're not going to be the guy that makes the play themselves. Does that make sense?
Let me ask you this: you see them both in practice. Samson Ebukam runs like a 1.5 10-yard split. We're talking about high level explosive ability.
Yeah,
you see Clelin Ferrell get off the ball.
When I see him get up, but I've seen him like the explosiveness off the snap that I've seen him be able to get off. I think that Clelin Ferrell should be playing over Drake Jackson. Drake Jackson, for example, right? I think Clelin Ferrell's a much better player than
you just really like Ferrell, huh?
Well, it's not that I didn't even really know a whole lot about him, and started watching him play, and all of a sudden you see him being able to set the edge, you see him being able to get off the ball. So I think he's a good player. I think he's a little undersold to speak. He's like the Jordan Mason, Charles Omenihu type of player, right? Those guys who haven't performed at another level. Yeah, Jordan Willis. Remember Jordan Willis?
Yeah. You said Jordan Mason, so I was asking
I
if
mean,
you meant
yeah,
Jordan
I'm
Willis.
sorry. I meant Jordan Willis. I meant
Yeah.
Jordan.
Okay.
He's kind of like he's in that Jordan Willis,
Okay.
Charles Omenihu type of
Sure.
player, who's a good player, but he's not like going to blow you away kind of thing. I think he's in that mold, right, where you can put him out there if you need to, and he's gonna do his job, and he's going to do it to the best of his ability, and it's going to be okay. I'm just not sold on. I think for me, I watched Drake Jackson just get stoned by a backup tackle for the Chargers on Friday night over and over again, and throughout that whole game. And I don't know.
He looks good, right? Like he's clearly worked on his body, and he looks good, but his ability to disengage blocks is reminding me eerily of other guys who used to look good in their uniform, like a Corey Lemonnier or an Eli Harold. Like, boy, did they look like how pass rushers should look in their uniform, but they couldn't disengage from blocks. It did look a little bit like that. Again, this is my first look at him this offseason, really. So I'm just trying to wait to get to the season before I really start passing judgment on who he is and what he is. But I can completely understand what you're saying here and what you're talking about. And I will say in general, defensive line depth, Jack, I think that's an issue. Running back depth, I saw nothing from Mason and Davis Price that told me that they're capable of playing for this team. Like, sure, they both run the ball fairly well, but both of them had a bunch of missed assignments in pass protection over the course of the preseason, and both of them had a bunch of blunders in the pass game too. Mason had that nice choice route against the Chargers, but he had the drop screen. He had a few other blunders in the pass game, and I don't think they would trust either of them. And then tight end, Jack, what are they going to go with? Fumagalli?
Well, I think it's going to be. I think Ross Dwelly actually could be a guy, because I think they really liked Ross. Like, Ross Dwelly's the guy you always think he's gone.
Keep trying to get rid of him, but they can't bring a player better than Ross. That's their problem.
Yeah, come on, man. Ross Dwelly is the true people's tight end. Let's just make sure let's put that out there first. I know Grant always likes them, but he's right in that dude has tremendous hands. But I think Cam Latu, the knee injury, maybe that's going to be the excuse where he doesn't. But I think Cam
was his knee showing some signs in practice, or was this like those knee injuries? One of those.
Yeah, I think it's one of those knee injuries, because it happened in the game, but up until the game, like, it didn't look like there was anything going wrong. And there's a lot to like about Cameron Latu. Like, I watched this dude in pass rush drills block everybody that he blocked. I saw him. Okay. I saw him beat Jair Brown repeatedly in one-on-ones. The problem was
the criticism was overblown. This is great, because I haven't heard this. Everybody's like, "Oh, Cam Latu sucks. He's going to get cut." So this is awesome to hear.
Well, I mean, no, but you didn't let me finish, because the problem is that he does all those things really good. He does all those things really good, and then the ball hits his hands and hits the ground, right? I mean, but at the same time, he kind of seemed like he was coming out of that a little bit.
Okay.
We saw that in week 2 of the preseason. He had a pretty good game.
I will say this too: tight end is a very difficult position, rookie to NFL adjustment, because strictly tight ends in college, either you're asked to block a lot, or you're lined up basically as a slot receiver, and you're asked to run like option routes and stuff like that in offenses. So you don't get integrated into this full thing of what the 49ers expect their tight ends to, which is line up in line and block, but also run routes, lining up as a receiver and run routes from being in line. So it's a lot of information that he has to process. So the drops could be just a case of him thinking so much by the time he gets to the point where he has to do what he has to do naturally. It's just like, oh, he drops it because he forgot to do that, because he's thinking about everything. Deebo Samuel talked about something like that with his early time in the offense. So that's actually a really good point from you. I didn't think of it that way. All I've heard this offseason is Latu sucks, and I think I might have just put that into my mind.
No, he was that's the thing. Like, I thought he did well with a lot of stuff. He just couldn't hold on to the ball. So that was what was frustrating. And that's a big part of it. And I think if they do try to use this knee as a way to, it's all plays together, but I really like the kid. Another thing about him, I will say, because we get to be on the field next to them during training camp, especially, is he just mixes well with the veterans. Like the other day, him and George Kittle typically work with Trent Williams when it comes to their work with the tackles and the run blocking stuff that they're doing. And just him and Trent Williams, I don't know what was being said, but they were definitely BSing on the sideline because as he was walking out there, he's kind of chuckling about something that Williams was telling him, So, I mean, that's the other thing too, as a rookie, that it seems like he's kind of getting it and getting his feet underneath him. We'll see what happens. I don't
So
think
this is Aaron Banks, you think, huh? I'll keep that in the back of my mind for next year because I don't think
Yeah.
he's going to play this year. I think this is a red shirt for him.
That would be a good one. I think Aaron, that's the same thing. Like Aaron Banks, people shit all over him, and I thought Aaron Banks, he didn't look great as a rookie, but we didn't get enough of a chance to really see what he was going to look like because he got injured in the first preseason game. So I think that was the other part of it too. So I think this is a team. I agree with you. The top heaviness. A lot of people have been saying that. I can kind of see where that's going. I think part of it too, though, is it looks top heavy, maybe a little more top heavy than it is, because we don't see the ones and the twos mixing together, right? In the preseason, it's all the twos together, and then all of a sudden, we see a little bit more of that in training camp practice, but we don't see that in the games.
I will say though that we have seen the twos of this defensive line in years past just run through twos, like they just are unblockable, and it felt like this year they were definitely much more, hey, not like this is the best. Like, for example, have you seen the Jets this preseason at all?
No, I haven't.
Like, they look like the old Niners. They go 9 deep in their defensive line, and every guy is just a bad motherfucker. Yeah. And like the Niners, like they go 9 deep, yes, but none of it didn't feel like they had backups where you're like, holy crap, that's their number 6 defensive line. It's like, okay, they have a nice Cleveland Ferrell. Okay, yeah.
Yeah, I know what you're saying. Like in terms of like, especially it's more of the defensive tackles. It's Kevin Givens and Javon Kinlaw. Those two just getting blown off the ball at will.
Did you feel that?
Yeah, I felt like they were getting driven off. And then in the game the other night, they're driving them off the ball. They take them out. They put in Kalia Davis and I don't remember who went in with them, but Kalia Davis, the first play he's in there, he just the penetration all of a sudden changes. Right. And all of a sudden you get those defensive tackles holding their ground, and now your linebackers make the plays. That's what this whole defense is about.
Right.
To
be fair, I mean, it is a one-gapping defense, and to be fair, like the big touchdown run, I saw some people put that on Kinlaw because he gets pushed out of the A-gap, but like the fit's right there for Jalen Graham to close the gap and meet him head-on in the A-gap. Like that's a one-on-one tackle. I think Jalen Graham's been great, by the way. Like I think he looks like a real player. But like that play looks a lot better for Kinlaw if he sticks his nose in the A gap and makes the tackle at 2 yards. That's true. I mean, it all kind of goes together, and that's the thing. Like we've just seen them get gashed so much. I think that's. But here's the thing, though, real quick before we go off of it. I mean, when we were in Vegas, the starting defense had this happen to them against the Raiders in the joint practice, like on that first day of their joint practices. That's why, like when that was all said and done, I was like, the players can't get out of here quick enough. They've gotten their butts handed to them every day. The Raiders offense. You really felt that across the board. Well, especially, I felt like, more so like their defense was getting handled. I felt like the Raiders offense was handling them all 3 days, the 2 practices and the game. I felt like that Raider offense had the better. And then the defense for the Raiders was a little bit more of a mixed bag, but they were better than everybody was saying, that's the Raiders. And how is Purdy doing so bad again? The Raiders are a better team than people, I think. You think so? I know their defensive line is probably a little bit better because I don't think people realize how good Max Crosby is. Like Bosa Garrett, he's right below there. Like he's really edging on that conversation. And then Tyree Wilson's a nice player. Chandler Jones is overpaid at this point, but still something. And Patrick Graham's a good defensive coordinator. Like they have a good sound scheme, even though they don't have anybody at linebacker besides. I mean, they could take Jack Hammer at linebacker right now. Well, we want Jack Coletto here. I know you're talking. I know what you're saying, but the funny thing about it, like for me, with the way that whole Vegas thing went down, I just felt like Vegas was what I noticed. The biggest thing that I noticed was that the 49ers receivers were getting hit all the time. Like there weren't wide open spaces. When the ball got there, they were being hit. And that wasn't happening in Santa Clara before. I think that was also the other biggest difference between the two. So we'll see. I mean, I think this is a team that has the opportunity, but they can't. There's a couple of guys they can't lose. They can't lose Trent Williams.
Nick Bosa's got to be here.
Yeah, 100%.
The quarterback's got to be here. Christian McCaffrey, I think, needs to stay healthy. You were talking about the running backs. I think Elijah Mitchell's going to be ready to go.
You think so?
Well, they were talking. He was at practice today.
Yeah.
He was at practice last Monday. Last Monday he practiced, and it was a little bit of a heavier day. And I thought he looked explosive. He looked like the same.
Oh, you thought he looked good? Okay.
Yeah, he looked like the same guy we've always seen, that I've always liked. And it's just a matter of with him. It's just a matter of him staying healthy. The dude's a hell of a running back. He just needs to stay healthy.
I think so too. And there was a point this offseason that I thought that perhaps they could get like a 4th or 5th round pick for him. I mean, if you can move Jeff Wilson for a 5th round pick, you got to think you can get at least that for Elijah Mitchell. But looking at Mason and Davis Price, Jack, like both are talented runners. I don't think that they are two guys the Niners would trust to get real snaps unless we're in garbage time or the other two guys got hurt, in which case that if they're looking to spell Christian McCaffrey, I think Mitchell's the guy they're going to trust. Mitchell's good in pass protection. He sticks his nose in there, doesn't fumble, and he's actually a little better in the pass game than anybody's ever given him credit for too.
Yeah. I think there was one play, speaking of Mitchell, it was on Monday. And one of the developments that's changed, we went into this training camp, and I remember I was telling Larry one day, I was like, might have been telling Grant before practice, I was like, man, remember back I was watching like the old 1994 Super Bowl, and they're throwing balls down to Ricky Waters down the middle of the field, and we just don't see that out of Kyle. Why isn't he doing what his dad used to do? And then we get into the training camp practices, and you see him go up the middle of the field to Christian McCaffrey. And there was a play on Monday of last week with Elijah Mitchell up the seam, and there was just a dart from Sam Darnold down the middle of the field for a big gain. That kind of stuff.
So throws that ball up the seam really, really well, by the way, just as a side. Like, that's one of his better balls.
Yeah, he's an interesting guy because he makes some really nice balls like that, like you're saying, where it looks pretty. And then he looks like Jimmy Garoppolo, where he's got a guy, the tight end running wide open, Troy Fumagalli running down the middle of the field. It's going to be a touchdown, and all of a sudden the ball's just like over his head. That kind of stuff, like the Super Bowl, the game, not the Super Bowl, but the
I know exactly what you're talking about.
Against the Rams. So he does those, but whatever. I think the Niners are going to be okay. I think I had them down as a 12-win team to start with. Do you think they're going to be a 12-win team? Do you think that's about where we should have them slotted?
Probably right now. I think my bigger issue is that I have difficulty projecting like 99% of the NFC right now, because surely I don't think that there's just 2 or 3 good teams in the NFC right now. It's just difficult to look at which rosters I think are really going to take that next step. Like, for example, I like Green Bay, but I can't put them in front of the Niners, the Eagles, the Cowboys. I like the Giants. Again, same thing. Don't think they're better than any of those teams. So for me, it's really going to come down to how do these teams actually look? Because I think we're going to be quite surprised. I think there's going to be some team in the NFC that's really good, and we just didn't know it, or we just didn't see it coming, because that's just how football works. And so I am relying a little bit on, hey, something always happens in the NFL that we don't see coming. I just don't see it coming in this NFC, dude. Like, I go down each of these rosters like every other day trying to figure out who this sleeper team is going to be. And goddamn, I can't find it.
Yeah. Let me ask you this one. Here's another one, super chat. I think this is a good one. Goes back to our Bosa. Holland says, do you think Bosa is waiting on Chris Jones to sign? Is that maybe the holdup? Do you think that has anything to do with it? I
don't think it has anything to do with it. They're in different kind of lanes in what they're looking for here.
Okay. And then Raymond brings up.
Do you?
No, I don't. Okay. Holland, I don't. So sorry, I didn't answer. Thank you for the super chat. I should have said that.
I got a little worried there because you were like,
no.
No.
I was looking at the comment section. Raymond brings up the Saints because you were talking about teams that could battle with these teams. I think the Saints.
You trust Dennis Allen, dude?
Well, the interesting part about the Saints is that they had a very good defense last year. If their defense continues to play at that level, now they have a guy, is Derek Carr, the guy that can kind of lift them over what they had last year at the position. Like, because last year they really didn't have a quarterback. It was Andy Dalton, right? Does Derek Carr change it for him?
He might, but I also think they lost a little bit on their defensive line, and I think like losing David what's his name, David Onyemata. I forgot where he signed. Marcus Davenport signed in Minnesota. He didn't play a lot for them, but he was a good player. And then, Jack, I don't know about you, but I'm putting money that this is the year that Cam Jordan and Demario Davis finally their age finally comes through.
They finally start to show up as their.
It's got to be sometime soon. Them and Fletcher Cox and Brandon Graham and Lane Johnson and Jason Kelsey. It's too much, man. Like, you guys have had your Hall of Fame careers. It's time. Like, come on. We got to fall off the cliff. We got to age. We got to let the 49ers come and win the Super Bowl.
Yeah, well, we're seeing that with Brandon Graham, right? I think the Eagles are putting him on the trade block. That's what the news was today. Russell Peterson brings up the Seahawks. I think the Seahawks are always they're usually a good team. I think they're probably a year away. I think this version of the Seahawks is probably like the 2012 Seahawks. 2011, 2012.
Yeah, okay. Yeah.
Like they're right on the verge. I think they've had some really good drafts, and they have some really good players up there already. I think they're maybe a year away from being able to overtake the 49ers.
I agree 100%. 100%. I think everybody's so young on that team, right? And by the way, I have that same question with Philly while we're on it. Like, I don't think it's such a seamless transition when you go from having a fully veteran roster with Kazir White and TJ Edwards and Chauncey Gardner-Johnson, and now you're trying to integrate very talented players, but granted, they're all very young, and Jalen Carter and Jordan Davis and Nakobe Dean. Like, I don't think that it's going to come, especially with the new coordinator, without its set of bumps. And we'll see if Jalen Hurts is the kind of quarterback that gets them through the bumps. Because if he is, then they're going to be amazing again. If he isn't, I don't think they'll be at quite as good as they were last year.
I love Philadelphia, their style, the way that they go about it. Their offense is pretty simplistic in that it's just, we're going to line up and we're going to run through you, and they have all the options and stuff that they do off of it. But I just love the simplicity of what they do, and it allows them to play fast and hard. It's very similar to like the Harbaugh days, it feels like. I like that kind of, I like smash mouth football. So, like, again, I'm old, so like,
Dude, I hate it. I can't stand when they do that stupid quarterback sneak play.
Well, I don't like that play.
Holy cow.
I don't like that play either. But it's one of those, like, when people get mad at it, I'm like, well, if you don't get mad at it, it's a good play because you can't stop it, right? But like, for me, I'm one of those guys who, like, one of my favorite games of all time was the 7-3 49ers win against the Giants in 1990 on Monday Night Football. Just
Is
because
that
it was
the one where they bust, he gets sacked on like first down, and they go no huddle on like 2nd and 18, like split back, and he throws a freaking 50-yard bomb down the pipe to Jerry Rice, who takes it for a touchdown? Or
No, the 7-3 game, the touchdown was it was to John Taylor. It was a curled route to the left side. Taylor made the cornerback miss and ran down the sidelines. Almost did the same thing in the NFC Championship game against the Giants later on that year. But it was a 7-3 game. That's the one, if you ever watch it, at the end of the game, like Ronnie Lott is in Phil Simms' face, and they're like, he's ready to fight with him on the field afterwards.
I've seen that game.
Because Simms was talking some smack about the 49ers apparently before, and Ronnie got in his face after the game. Anyway, again, like, I'm old, so I like to remember, like, hey man, I can. My girlfriend gives me shit all the time because she tells me that I can tell time based on 49ers games. You know, I remember that.
Is there another way to notice time goes by? Like, for me, I notice the seasons because of where we are in football season.
That's how I am too. That's one of the, with what's going on based on a lot of my life events, I can tell you because this is where I was watching this and that. And I grew up at Candlestick Park pretty much. Like, I had season tickets from the time from like 1985 and through 2003. So I was like, I don't know, 11 years old at the time. So I was at Candlestick Park when the Niners beat the Giants.
That must have been magical.
Oh yeah, it was wild. And then like I was there in 81 when they beat the Giants to clinch the NFC West. We were sitting in the north side, and they win the game. Everybody's like going on the field. My dad's buddy grabs me. We run across the field, and then everybody's got Ronnie Lott up on their shoulders on the other end of the field, and like he picks me up, and I'm slapping Ronnie Lott's thigh pads and shit. So yeah. So it's cool stuff.
You give him a nice smack. Like,
yeah, no, I didn't
get ready.
Didn't get the high five or anything like that, but I was trying to hit him and get a piece of history, right? So
were you a big Montana guy, like right away in 81? Like, this was the guy, he was your favorite player. Jack Hammer was already all Joe Montana.
No, I was all Joe Montana. My first 49er game first 49er game that I ever went to was in '80, and it was the game when they came back to beat the Saints. I don't really remember a whole lot about it because I was so little, but yeah, that was the first game that I went to. I was a Joe Montana all the way through. I was Joe Montana to the point that when I was in high school, I almost got into a fight with my backup quarterback because he was a Steve Young fan, and I didn't like something that he said one day after practice because we'd stayed after practice to throw the ball around, and he was talking smack to me about Steve Young, and I didn't like it. I ended up just taking the ball bag and walking in, told him a few choice words and walked off.
That's funny.
No, but I've always been a Joe guy. I was always a Joe guy. Steve won me over, obviously, because he won the Super Bowl. And now you watch Steve talk, and there's nobody I want to hear talk about 49ers more than Steve Young. I think he's as good as there is when it comes to his analysis of.
I will say, I mean, obviously, I have only consumed all of this way past when it happened, right? I've seen a lot of VCR. My dad used to VCR the game, so I've seen an unbelievable amount of like VCR tapes of these games, which is pretty funny. I always thought Steve Young, like when you look at the statistics, when you look at who he was physically and all of that, just got wildly underrated because he had to follow Joe Montana. Like when you look at the fact that he won 2 MVPs, but nobody really cared about the 2 MVPs at the time because it was like, you have to win the Super Bowl and all of that. He ended his career #1 in passer rating all time. He had like records for completion percentage, all of that. When you look at his efficiency, how efficient he became as a passer, when you look at what he had to deal with post salary cap in '94, when the Niners were Terry Donahue was drafting like crap teams and all of that. Like, I think that Steve Young's career got very underrated and he didn't get the benefit of some of the things Joe got to in the 80s.
Oh, yeah, no, and I would agree with that. I think Montana benefited from the fact that there was no salary cap, so they kept the team intact. They always got a good – that's the thing.
Amazing defense. Amazing defense.
That's the thing that's the biggest thing is, people like will put down Brock Purdy or Jimmy Garoppolo in part because of how they, the defense played for them, right? But if you go back and you look at the defenses that Joe Montana had the year they won the Super Bowls, those were always really damn good defenses, right? Like top 2, top 3 level defenses.
Jack, you already know that if coverage of sports was being talked about today, people would be talking about Marino and Elway versus Montana daily. Like if you take the 80s and you put it in today's media and today's, like, people would be having that conversation of, hey, Marino and Elway are so talented and surrounded by shit versus Montana, who's surrounded by everything, but he's also succeeding. It would be Brady Rodgers and Brady Manning, and it would just be that, but you would have all three of them playing like at the exact same time, almost like coinciding together, and that would be a funny conversation, wouldn't it?
Oh yeah. Well, that was happening then. The difference was that we didn't have Twitter. We didn't have all the technology to argue with people all around the world like nonstop. But that was happening all the time. Like that's why when the whole dink and dunk thing came about, like I was like, that's what they used to say about Joe Montana. Joe Montana was always called the dink. It was always a dink and dunk. Like that's kind of where I always went back to that with, I think it was like, what's his name? Bill Parcells was always very negative about the way the 49ers were. I think he might have even called Joe Montana, and Bill Walsh a dink and dunk offense back in those days. So that's what I always think.
And if you go look at what they did to the receivers to disrupt timing, the way they beat them up at the line of scrimmage, it's like, yo.
Oh yeah, no, and that's the other thing too, is that no team did it better against the 49ers than Bill Parcells and Bill Belichick. They gave him a hard time a lot. And the 49ers from 85 to 80 was 85, 86, 87. 87 wasn't because of the Giants, but when they were losing in 85 and 86 in the playoffs, it was to the Giants. The Giants were handling them on a regular basis at that point. And that's why when 90 came around, it was, you go back and you look at those days, man, it was Washington and Washington, Chicago, the Giants. Those were the teams.
Mm-hmm. The Niners and the 49ers, of course.
And the 49ers, right. Yeah. Those were the rivalries, right? That's why, like, you put out something a while back about, like, when you hear the different tones of the different.
Yeah. I remember you replied to that and I was like, yo, what is this guy hearing?
No, because that's what I remember, because those were in 89, 90, around that time period, the Giants and the Niners, and that was a big deal, like all the time. I remember a Monday night game already told you the one game, the 7-3 game. I remember another one that was like that. It was a Monday night game. And I remember some dude like he was throwing money out of after the game. He's throwing dollar bills out of the suites at Candlestick Park to the people below. I don't know why, but it was like, those
He's
games
making it
were
rain.
wild. He was back in the old days. Anyway, yeah. No, so my old head goes back to those days.
That's awesome. That's awesome. I mean, I'll get there eventually. 2005 will become like 2008 will become like that at some point for me too.
Yeah. You got about 30 years on. You got about 20, probably about 20 years, because I know how old you are, around how old you are. You got about 20 years to catch up to me. Then you'll be the old guy.
I mean, if you're only 20 years older than me, you're not too old yet.
No, but this has been good, man. I've watched you do this a lot, and I always, like I said at the beginning, I appreciate the way that you look at the game. And there's a lot of times when I see your tweets and I agree with a lot of what you're having to say, and I'm like, damn, that's good. I wish I thought of that first. So I'm glad we got a chance to sit down.
I also like it because we got a good back and forth, and that's what I like. You're not one of those people, because a lot of people also, like, once you become friendly with them, they no longer disagree with your takes. And it's like, yo, we're literally here so we can start like doing this little back and forth thing because we all like football. And I like when people give me the little back and forth. I edge for a little bit. So I like that you actually disagree and will give your reasons why you disagree, because those are the conversations that are the most fun to have. That's the lunchroom from, 15 years ago when I was in elementary school and middle school with my friends. And so it's fun to recreate that.
No, absolutely. Like I always tell, like I didn't tell you tonight, but a lot of times, like when I was doing roundtables and stuff this year, I'd be like, I tell everybody, because they're like, they don't usually do this stuff with me. I'm like, hey, if you don't agree with me, don't feel you can tell me I'm full of beans. Like you can tell me I'm full of shit. I don't care, because I'm going to tell you that if I disagree with you, I'm going to tell you I disagree with you. So like, don't take it personally. It's not like a personal attack. And anyway, so it's fun. It's good to have the back and forth, and I appreciate it.
Absolutely.
All right. Well, thank you. Yeah, you got anything coming up? I know you have your own channel. You got anything coming up?
Not really, to be honest. I streamed twice today, so you might not see me for another few days here. But we'll see. We'll see what happens. Honestly, I have a feeling that the Nick Bosa deal is going to spring us all back into action very soon. So
there you go. So hey, if you check it out, check out Vish's channel. He's got his Vish Kumaran show. Check it out. Make sure you subscribe and like and do all those things on his channel. Make sure before you leave here, I put that up earlier, hit the subscribe button if you're not already subscribed to the channel. Hit the like button, because that's huge for all of us. And then also turn your notifications, because my schedule's all over the place and you're never going to know when I'm going to hit. So make sure you got the notifications on. All right, Vish, I appreciate you coming on, man.
Thank you, Jack. We'll do this again sometime soon.
Absolutely. Thanks, everybody. Have a great night. We'll talk to you soon.